All right, guys, welcome back to DeCecco U.S. History. If you're here, it's because you're learning about the late 1800s, and you're going to really get into two groups of people here, the farmers and another group known as the populists. So let's get it on here. Late 1800s. Well, we're going to talk a lot about farmers today, so if you're here, you're in a good place. Farmers were struggling, so during the late 1880s, their new inventions would really increase farm production. That sounds like a good thing, but as with anything, when you produce too much, greater production led to lower prices for farm goods. So the cost of farming was going up, and so was farm production. But the price that farmers were getting paid for their wheat and their grains and their cotton was going down. So farmers were making less money, but having to spend more money. And that was just one of their many problems. So let's get it going here. We're going to take just a quick peek at the West here to recap it for you. So there's something known as the agricultural revolution. Well, if you forget that, you really just can use the language to figure it out. Agriculture is farming. Revolution is major changes. So what happened in the late 1800s? There were new technologies that helped westward expansion and the exploitation of the wealth in the West. They help farmers become more productive. All right. So a couple things are happening here which really develops the West. Railroads are going to bring many people plus manufactured goods to the West. Railroads also brought Western crops and cattle to the cities of the East. So there's a natural two-way trade here between West and East. Right. The open range was pretty much the Great Plains was wide open until the invention of barbed wire and Joseph Glidden's invention. It aided to the growth of farming and ranching, and people are going to fence off areas and close the Great Plains. The old wooden plows were really terrible. They would break and really wouldn't cut through the tough prairie soil. But now John Deere invented the steel plow, which was very sturdy and it would last a really long time, and people could use it to break up the soil and then to farm. Other ways people aided their business out west was building windmills to pull water from the surface of the really dry westward lands. And then mechanical reapers really encouraged westward expansion because now you needed very few people on the farm to harvest these large crops because now you had a machine to do it. That is known as the mechanical reaper. If you forgot, that guy's name was Cyrus McCormick. So there's giving you a little example of this, the steel plow. That's an early John Deere plow. I'm sure that if you've had a John Deere toy or you saw a John Deere tractor, it's much more advanced than that now, and it's nice, pretty green and yellow. This is ugly and black, right? There's a windmill to get water from this very dry prairie area, and that is the mechanical reaper, a primitive version of today's tractor, right? So if you need the vocabulary and some of you have been missing it, just pause it and you'll be able to grab that, all right? What is going on out west? Well, we know there's farming. What else do we have? Mining in the Rocky Mountains, in the very dry areas, out in Arizona, out in New Mexico. Miners dig for natural resources. So what do you have down there under those rocks? Gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc. And those are there. You got to go down and get them, though. So you can't really farm in that area. It's too rocky. There's not enough rainfall, but you could definitely get those natural materials, all right? The last thing that you're going to find, definitely out west in the Great Plains, you're going to find some farming, but the other idea is people will be ranching, and that is raising products or raising an animal so that someone can eat it. So ranchers raised cattle, and cowboys moved huge herds from the ranches to the open range to the rail lines and the cow towns. If you paid attention in class, I talked to you about those trails that happened. Cowboys actually would drive the cattle to the rail towns, put the livestock on the rails, bring it to the cities of the East, Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, New York City, right? What were farmers doing? Well, they really liked the Great Plains because of its rich topsoil, but it wasn't easy. You had to overcome heat, blizzards, and droughts, and insects, and conflict with ranchers, and there were range wars, and it was pretty much the wild, wild west out there. So when we talk about the West, you should know three things that are happening. There's ranching, there's farming, and there's mining. All right, so these were the cattle trails where cowboys would drive the cattle up the Goodnight Loving Trail, up to Cheyenne, put the livestock on the rails, and send them to the cities of the East, right over here to Chicago. All right, so there's some Chisholm Trail, Western Trail, there's all these different names. Those are trails to bring the cattle up, and we went through that in class. All right. The last thing that's going on out west is land was pretty cheap. So if you don't remember the Homestead Act, this is like the fourth time that we've really discussed this. Happens in 1862, right during the middle of the Civil War. You got 160 acres of land. All you had to do was farm the land for 5 years, build a modern-sized house, put a windmill up, and make the land useful. If you can do that, you own 160 acres after 5 years, and people did it. They were called homesteaders. And the other issue that we dealt with before was the Morrill Land Grant Act, 1862. James Morrill proposed a law that said, hey, every state out west has got to create land grant colleges. So there's two things we're going to do in those land grant colleges. We're going to learn how to farm more effectively, and we're going to research materials and soil types and fertilizer to try to get the most out of the land, right? And I know in class we talked about Texas A&M down here being an agricultural and manufacturing university. But when you take a look at the map, all these western states, all these little red dots, they built land grant colleges or universities. The federal government forced them to do that. All right, here it is. First land grant home economics college, Iowa State University. They farm a lot of corn out there in Iowa if you've ever been out there. We're going to spend some time with a chart here just looking at inventions and how they changed the West. So the passenger elevator was really just an invention in the 1850s, built in skyscrapers to get people up to the higher floors and back down. Nobody wants to walk up a 35-story building up the stairs. You want to take the elevator. And that was Elijah Graves Otis who created that elevator. Barbed wire was Joseph Glidden. Allowed farmers to actually create a fence. You couldn't build a wooden fence; it was too expensive. But now you can put 4 stakes in the ground and wrap that wire around those 4 stakes. You got yourself a fence, which really closed the prairies, right? Really out west, you go all the way out to like San Francisco, Sacramento out there. Levi Strauss created our blue jeans that we wear every day, known as Levi's. He took the heavy-duty fabric that people were making tents out of and started to make the clothing out of that. So really, it became kind of a fashion garment. And if you look around your classrooms, people are still wearing blue jeans today, right? 1874, the first structural steel bridge. Say that 5 times fast, right? Steel was a better material than cast iron, and Carnegie Mill pumped the steel out, and that allowed people to build longer spanning bridges. That's going to last a really long time, right? 1876, Alexander Graham Bell creates the telephone, which is going to increase everything from communication for businesses, political reasons, social groups, families, farming groups, getting products back and forth. So the telephone really revolutionizes the ability to communicate back and forth, especially between East and West. The earliest incandescent lights before the end of the century, offices, homes, factories, farms were affected by the availability of long hours because they had lighting. And if you forgot who invented the light bulb, you better start remembering New Jersey, Menlo Park. Yeah, you better come up with Thomas Edison, right? In 1892, late 1800s, first gas-powered car and first gas-powered tractor. Now we can get rid of horses because we have a machine doing the work for us. As long as we have some gasoline, that machine's going to keep working, all right? So let's take a good look at farmers' issues, populists, and what they wanted to do with the federal government. So farmers are going to gain some influence and power through 2 organizations. Once again, before this time period, we really haven't talked about farmers too much. We learned about industrialists and factories and city life, but what was happening with farmers? Well, they developed something known as the Grange. The farmers had a lot of problems. The other thing they developed was a political voice known as the Populist Party, right? So if you see the word Grange or you see populist, you want to associate that with a group of people called farmers, right? The Grange, what did it do? Organized, founded in 1867. Original intent was just kind of as a social means to get farmers together talking, because you really didn't talk to your neighbor because he's 7 miles away, right? And what they found out was that railroad companies had really control over the shipping rates, the storage facilities, the grain elevators, and that really impacted and was hurting farmers in a negative way. So the Grange began to say, hey, it's not just hurting one farmer, it's hurting all these farmers. So we're going to pressure the federal government to make some political changes. And we wanted them to limit the power of the railroads. That's what farmers wanted, right? It's a great court case, Munn versus Illinois, Supreme Court case. It allowed the states, not the federal government at this time, but the states, to regulate certain businesses inside of their borders, so inside the states, including railroads. Later on, we'll deal with that in terms of interstate trade. The federal government will regulate railroads everywhere around the country. And you should know that as the Interstate Commerce Commission, and that is the federal government telling railroads what they can do around the entire country. This Supreme Court case was only the states doing it. So not a big deal, but why did this happen? Because the populists, the Grange, the farmers began to tell the government, we need some help. And that's the kind of help that they got, all right? So let's deal with the Populists. The Populists is the political voice. So it's a new political party. It was formed for farmers. And their platform was pretty simple. Do anything and everything to help out farmers. So this graduated income tax, we'll get into in the progressive era. The direct election of U.S. senators, we will talk about when we get to the progressive era. And really what they wanted was help from the government. They wanted the government to control telephone and telegraph companies. They wanted actually the government to regulate railroads, regulate shipping rates. Many of the ideas and the goals of these populists eventually become law, but it doesn't necessarily happen right away for them. They might have to wait a little bit up to the progressive era. So we're going to talk about a very important election, and we're going to finish up here. So you should know about the election of 1896. If you did not study that in your classes, pay close attention now, all right? So the biggest populist issue was free silver. The farmers wanted the government to print more silver coins, put more silver dollars out in circulation to create inflation to raise prices. So in its simplest form, farmers want the government to print more money. Well, the federal government actually does the opposite in 1892. They switched from printing money that was backed by gold and silver to only printing money backed by gold. That's known as the gold standard, 1892. Populists wanted, once again, in its simplest form, they wanted the government to print more money, right? So they wanted the free coinage of silver. That would produce cheaper money. It would be easier for farmers to pay off the debts. And the problem was farm products, the prices for those products was going down. And by printing more money, that would create farm products or the prices for those products to go up. So that's basically what the farmers wanted. Well, we had this big election between two major candidates, William Jennings Bryan, who, if you've been in any U.S. history class, you better know who that is. He was the populist candidate. He's the guy representing farmers. Well, the Democrats were like, this guy's got a lot of support, so maybe he can become the president. So they kind of adopted him. They said, we want you to run for the presidency as a Democrat. But really, who is he? He's a populist. So he supports everything the farmers want or the populists want. On the flip side of that coin is William McKinley. He's the Republican. He's all about big business. He's all about laissez-faire. And guess what? You know, there's William Jennings Bryan over here, and there's William McKinley, kind of staunch. Well, if you need that vocabulary for my worksheet, pause it. Some of you skip over and pause it. You know, what are the results? McKinley will beat him. William Jennings Bryan never becomes president. The populists kind of disappear as a political party, but the populist ideas, the ideas of the federal government being responsible, helping people, will make their way into other political parties, and that will happen with the Progressive Party in the early 1900s. If you take a quick look at the election, you'll notice that William Jennings Bryan got all the support from the southern states because they're all farmers, and the states in the Midwest, out in the West, because these are all farmers. Well, William McKinley, he is going to dominate the cities of the Northeast, the factories, the city life. And when you look at the electoral vote, it's pretty much clear that William McKinley will win. But the popular vote shows us this race was really close, right? Really close. 500,000 votes, really close. Well, what are some little changes at the turn of the century, right around 1900? This is going to take us into the progressive era. The economy was changing. We were becoming more of an industrial nation, a city-based nation, rather than agrarian or farmer. The United States is going to sit a nation of cities rather than farms. Easy point. The West is pretty much closed. Before this time period, it was open, there was land, there was opportunity. Now, the West has kind of been filled up, so it doesn't have that influence that it once did. New immigrants. If you don't know who the new immigrants are, go back and watch the video on immigration. They created a new, complex, pluralistic, or mosaic culture in America. And what's the U.S. doing? We are entering into a new century and a modern age. So if you need some time to go through that, you want to watch it again, go ahead. But we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.